The Path to Glory was a documentary produced by the Colombans in Korea towards the end of the 1950s. The background was that around the world, Korea, because of the war, was very much in the minds of people. And even though the war had finished, there was no treaty, it was an armistice, and there was still the conflict between East and West. And so it was a very tense place. And it was very much also on the minds of the Colombans at the time, because during the war, 7 of the priests had been killed, and another 2 had been spent time in North Korea, up to 2 years in jail. Then, all through the 50s, the Colombans were able to send probably each year 8 or 9 new priests. So it was very much, a vibrant mission at the time, taking up a lot of resources and a lot of interest for the society. And against that background then, they decided to make a documentary focusing on the Korean church, but also, I suppose, as a promotion material for the Colombans. And looking at it, it was made 60 years ago. It shows the history of the church, and which is very unique, of course, in Catholic circles, in the sense that it wasn't missionaries who brought in the faith, but Korean scholars themselves. So that's very much highlighted in the documentary. And of course, the minute the faith community began to take roots here, it faced very severe persecution right through the 1800s. And that's also very much highlighted in the documentary. And of course, the Colombans then, who came in 1933 and were there for the Japanese, during the Japanese occupation, liberation, and the Korean War. We'd also lost priests, as I said, during the war. So martyrdom was very much a reality up to the 20th century. So the Colombans produced that, as I said, at one level to promote education about Korea and the church, and another level, as promotion materials for the society. And I remember when I was a student in the 1970s, if new people who were interested in the society came to the seminary, that was one of the documentaries we always showed them, that these are the Colombans. And then when priests went to visit parishes or invited out to give talks, the Path to Glory was a standard kind of documentary that they showed the people. So it was very much used during that period. And of course, that's 60 years ago now. So when looking at it, I think we always have to take into account that, it has the mindset at one level of where the world was at 60 years ago, May not always be politically correct in today's world, but it does highlight, the Korean church, the faith of the people, and I think the commitment of the society to Korea. So I think it's well worth watching. Thank you.
I'm a Colomban priest. Anthony Collier is my name. With me is my catechist, Gabriel Kim. When trouble came, we priests were to stay with our people. That had been the decision. But I was not to stay long. I was taken the first morning of the war. and slain with my catechist on the spot. 2 days he lay beside me in that ditch to be saved and live out more time on earth. But I left my beloved parish behind me, and there on the edge of time and the brink of eternity, the whole history of Christianity in Korea unfolded before me. Like an immortal canvas come to life, the sacrifice of each of those who had gone before me, caught up in glory, its full beauty known to God alone. To earthly eyes, this is the way it happened. Korea in 1777 was a hermit kingdom. Nobody was permitted to leave or enter under pain of death. She had to send each year a delegation to carry tribute to the emperor in Peking. These men were Korean scholars who had read a book on Christianity. The doctrine so aroused their interest, they had prevailed on a member of the delegation to bring back secretly from Peking more books on the subject. And from faraway Peking came their friend Ri. Peter was now his name. For in seeking books for his friends, he had found faith for himself, been instructed and baptized by the Jesuit fathers. The first Christian was now inside the hermit kingdom. They see it all so clearly now. The future then was hidden from their eyes. The expected books were there, but something strange beside. God's gift to his own. The same gift he had given his son. A cross for his Christus. A cross for his Christians. And so they started on their road to Calvary, not knowing, but ever so eager. The river of time flowed on. Harvest time came around. Peter re-instructed and now baptized his learned friends. The infant church began its turbulent life. Korea's first missionaries began their work. The scholars wanted others to share the peace that comes with knowing that there is a God. From hamlet to village to city they went, the first lights shining in the darkness of paganism. Unique in the history of our church, the faith was not brought to them. They had gone out and got it, and daily their numbers grew. The movement did not go long unnoticed. As many hundreds embraced it, local lords saw in it a threat to their power. Jealous of it like petty tyrants of all ages, they sent a representative to the court who whispered in the emperor's ear, "This thing called Christianity is a dangerous movement. It has some connection with the outside world. It must be stopped." The emperor listened to the pagan voices and was persuaded. A court secretary was called, an edict issued. Christianity was outlawed. From then on, it was death to be a Christian, to harbor one, or to know of one and not report it. The emperor and his lords thought it would be easy. The notices and threats went out, but a stubborn and dogged resistance stared back at them. It never faltered. They had yet to learn, you may kill the body, but your hands cannot reach the spirit. Some 5,000 Christians in Korea went on their road to Calvary as faith was put to a test. The reed was sorely bruised, but it was not crushed. By smuggled letters, the voice of faith reached the Bishop of Pekin. His persecuted Korean children begged him for a priest. Father Tu was Chinese, but he volunteered to go to his Korean brothers. Down through Manchuria in the dead of winter, he came to the frozen Yalu. On the other side of that river, his mission awaited him. To go meant death, and yet he went. The guard, the first priest to enter the forbidden land. Dressed as a Korean scholar, he made his way south. He had arranged with the Christians to wait for him at the outskirts of Seoul. Ironically, they met beside one of the emperor's edicts. The cross drawn on the ground was the means of identification, for Christians could trust no one but a fellow Christian. There was a price on all their heads. The penalty was torture and death by decapitation. And for the first time, the sacrifice of the Mass was celebrated on Korean soil. For a few short months, Father Tu instructed, traveled, and consoled. For the time allotted to him, the infant Korean Church enjoyed the life of grace that flows through the sacraments. Of the local lords, and the police were on the lookout for him. His end was much the same as mine. A different uniform on his captors. With me it was a bullet. For him it was the sword. It's all behind you now, Father Tu. In the years that followed, the harried flock was left without a pastor. People knew him as Paul the Potter. Christians saw in him a staff to lean on. Father Tu had trained him as he had others against the time when the sword would reach him. Hunted as they were, the Christians led almost a nomad life. Pottery became one of their trades. With it, some kind of livelihood was possible wherever there was clay. Word went around that Paul was in the village. Faithful collected in a Christian's home. Danger lurked always, from without and from within. There, while he spun the potter's wheel, he kept the faith alive in the hearts of the people. Has never had its traitors. There was a betrayal once before. Then, 30 pieces of silver. bought a potter's field. Here, a few brass coins buys a potter's life. Such is the price of glory. Where one leaves off, another takes up. That has been the church's history. Father, too, and his little band of catechists had done their part. The cross was now placed on other shoulders. Keenly alive to the troubled lot of his children in Korea, the Holy Father, Pope Leo XII, in 1827, placed the problem in the hands of the Paris Foreign Missions. A great wall had been built around Korea to cut it off from the rest of the world. But man's handiwork means but little when pitted against the power of faith. Following the Pope's call, French missionaries entered the forbidden country, one by land, two others by sea. Prolonged mourning was a Korean custom. Mourners wore a special garb. They were expected to hide their faces and maintain silence. All through the years of persecution, the foreign missionaries disguised themselves as mourners, carrying identification badges on their person, smuggled out to them by Korean Christians. Bishop Ambert, Father Chastain, and Father Maubin got in safely, and finally met in secret. Consulting together, they made out a report on the state of the church as they found it. Eventually, it reached Rome. Then, for a few fleeting months, traveling mainly at night, they administered the sacraments to the people. Their short ministry soon came to an end. Police discovered some mass vestments in a Christian's house and reported it to the Queen Regent. When she learned that foreigners had dared to enter her kingdom, she cried in anger, "The Christians are again swarming through the land. It is not enough to cut down a weed, it must be uprooted." With great violence, a new persecution began. Of the three foreigners, Bishop Ambert was the first to be taken, and promised leniency for the country's Christians if his fellow missionaries surrendered. He sent word to Fathers Chastain and Maubin. They came, but the promise was broken. There was only death for priests and laity, the agony of waiting for the end, the icy terror of the cruel sword. But the Empress learned the sword is often double-edged. In slashing at the church, she was to cut at some she loved. Two of her favorite court attendants, Columba and Agnes Kim, were found to be Christians. No blandishments could turn them, and in a very fury, she had them led to execution. Not even children were spared. But the flame of faith had been kindled in their hearts. Neither threats nor promises could extinguish it, and it shone on after they had been murdered. But scarcely had one hand slipped from the plow when another was there to take its place. Smuggled out as a boy, Andrew Kim was returning to his native land, a priest of God, Korea's first. With him came Bishop Ferriol and Father Davily, both of them Paris foreign missions. At a lonely part of the coast, they slipped into the country. As well as dispensing the sacraments, Father Kim charted the hostile coast to keep the church's lifeline open for others. While at this task, he was captured by one of the local lords. He went on his last mile, knowing what his fate would be. During his mock trial, Father Kim was given the opportunity to defend himself. Instead, he spoke out in the defense of God. He was carried off to pay publicly the penalty for his multiple offenses. Having left the country without permission, a Korean who became a priest to return secretly and teach Christianity. The penalty was torture, then death by the executioner's sword. Et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. The ranks of the faithful never faltered. Their lengthening line had no end. No matter what measures the authorities took, this obstinate thing, Christianity, would not die. The French missionaries kept coming. In a burst of fury, the new Korean emperor started another fierce persecution. Father Juste de Bretignier was one of its victims. They battered his legs with clubs. He could not walk it all the way, but he made it just the same. Gradually, the persecutions tapered off. Christianity emerged slowly into the open, still suspect, barely tolerated. And from the dwellings of the lowly, its roots spread to the palaces of the mighty. The Queen Mother opened her heart to religion. She could not profess it openly, but she longed for the life of the sacraments. One of her ladies-in-waiting came to the bishop in a sedan chair, and while she waited at his house, the bishop, hidden in the sedan chair, made his way to the Queen. Ebbs and tides, never standing still, always moving, witnesses but another challenge to the freedoms of the people. 1950, war. attack by the Reds had spent itself. The UN forces gathered strength and began the long fight back. But it was too late to save those who had been taken in the first days. This time, the missionaries were not alone. Marching with them were captured GIs. In charge was a North Korean major known as the Tiger, the sadist. It was a death march from the beginning. 2 soldiers fell by the wayside exhausted. This was against the Tiger's commands. Did they not know that he was a major and had the power of life and death? To save the lives of his 2 men, Lieutenant Thornton accepted full responsibility. The Tiger pulled his gun. Commissioner Lord of the Salvation Army pleaded vainly for his life. But no bullet could ever destroy that heroic act. A third of the marchers never made it. They never saw the end of their pilgrimage. Father Villamot was held up and kept going by Columban Father Philip Crosby. The infamous march continued for mile on painful mile north into the winter. Father Coyas and Bishop Quinlan carried Mother Therese. This Carmelite nun is blind. On the last day of the terrible march, Mother Beatrix, aged 76, superior of the Sisters of St. Paul, could go no further. And 50 years of devoted service to orphans in Korea end there in the snow. Bishop Byrne of Maryknoll, apostolic delegate, survived the march, only to die in prison camp. Bishop Quinlan of the Columban Fathers lived to be with him at the end. The war is over. Life takes up again. Farmers return to till the soil. Bishop Byrne will never return, but from the Holy See journeyed another representative, Cardinal Agajanian. Propagation of the faith came to honor the dead and console the living. From the Holy Father, a message of encouragement. And a prayer for our Columban dead. 4, Monsignor Brennan of Chicago, Father Cusack, Father Canavan, and Father O'Brien of Ireland lie somewhere in unknown graves. 3 others are here. I was but one of them. Where we left off, others continue. Like Father Riley's altar boy, ordained by Bishop Quinlan. My bishop, my Columban brother, easing our sleep now. The sacrifice has not been in vain. By the thousands, the faithful march in procession to Christ the King. Walking with them are we, the dead, unseen, unheard, but yet by some remembered. Our sorrow has now turned to joy, for we have finished, each in our human way, the work we were given to do. Amen, amen, I say to you, except a grain of wheat fall to the ground and die, it remains alone. But if it die, it brings forth much fruit.